Hey GP learners, and welcome to this episode where myself and Andy are live together, first time in quite a while, and we're going to be talking about the draft suggested changes to the GP contract for 25-26. These have tentatively been approved by the GPC. We're going to go through everything in the letter from the NHS England, as well as the GPC responses, show you some of the detail you haven't heard about because it's not been covered in any of the media, and then also give you all the stuff about what's missing, what the future may be, and basically everything you need to know about this contract. So let's get cracking. We're taking hands to your primary care and learning. Say hi, Andy. Hello, GP learners, and thank you all for joining us on this brisk Saturday morning. I know it's out of schedule for what we normally do, but when the GP contract information drops, it's one of those things you have to cover, and you have to cover well and quickly, and that's what we're hoping to do for you live this morning. How are we doing there, Andy?
Yeah, pretty good. Just had a last-minute laptop restart, as those who joined us for the soft start will be aware, but I think we're all up and running now and good to go. Really excited.
So I guess just to cover in brief what we're going to go through in this particular session. So we obviously have the draft contract that's now been confirmed. We've been waiting for this for several months. And the official version was released yesterday morning on by NHS England. And obviously this has been negotiated and tentatively, and the word tentatively, agreed by the GPC as of Thursday evening. So what we're going to do is have a look at the letter from NHS England, go through it stage by stage. We're then going to share with you some information from our chair, GPC, Dr. Katie Bramwell-Stainer, highlights a few of those points and stuff. We're going to do a bit of jumping around, showing you different parts. We've analysed some of this. We've found some interesting points that other people haven't commented on. And plus there's some stuff in this letter that hasn't been mentioned in any of the media as well. So you need to make sure that you are watching the whole of this episode, otherwise you're going to miss those key points.
And then, and then I guess we'll have a little bit of reflections. We've had some conversations and thoughts, but I'm sure things will occur to us online. Things will occur to you as well as we go through, or if you've had a look at the contract. So please pop your reflections as we go through, and when we get the reflections section in the comments, have a think about what's missing there as well, and look to the future, because there is ongoing negotiations for a more substantive and more changed contract next year. So we'll look to the future at the end, but shall we get started?
I think we will. So the first point we're going to go to is have a look at the letter. So Andy's just bringing it up for us.
It's good. Are we sharing my screen, Andy?
We are not. That would help.
Yeah.
And there we are now. So first thing we're going to do, like we said, is have a look at the draft offer. So this is the letter that's come through from NHS England. It's about 19 pages, I think, in total, was it?
It is, yeah. There's 3 pages which are the letter, and then there's 2 annexes. Annex A, which is a textual annex that gives a lot more detail about changes, and actually there are some things in there, as Gabby says, which aren't in the main sort of summary part of the letter, so it's worth sort of reading through and having a look at the whole letter. And then there are some tables that give details to changes to the QOF thresholds and all sorts of other things that are better expressed as tables. So that's what the document looks like. Just also with commenting, I think this is the first time in the last 4 years that we've had a contract that has the support of the BMA GPC. I think
3 years, I believe.
3 years.
We had 2 years of imposed contract, I believe it was. But clarify, our memories are getting a little bit old.
Clarify for us.
We've covered so many imposed contracts. I think we're getting confused. What is it correct? No,
but auspicious in that way. It's the first time that this is
But tentatively, and we're going to come to why we keep mentioning tentatively in a second, because there are a couple of points that are still not agreed. And again, just for clarity, the full detail of the contract is not out. This is just the offer. The detail that will probably still come out in the next few weeks, and I suspect it will, as usual, be the last week of March. So you may be seeing us live again in a few weeks' time. But yeah.
Right, so shall we start going through? I mean, there's a brief introduction with some context setting, which I don't think really tells us anything new. So it's probably worth going to the points, and I think there's 12 or 13 points. And I guess we'll go through them, read them. Some people might be listening in audio, and then we'll react and give a bit of thoughts on them, really. So do you want to take us with point 1, Gandhi?
Yeah, so I guess the headline point is the fact there is a significant increase in the cost, the funding within the contract. So in total, there's an 889 million uplift of the contract. And there's a separate increase, which is the 80 million being given to do the advice and guidance part, the myself and Andy covered a few weeks back when we heard about it and stuff. This pictogram's really good at sharing, I guess, a lot of the details. And sorry that we've covered slight part of that.
What you can't see. So this breaks down the 889 million to show you kind of how much is going in different places, to give you a sort of visual idea of where like the weight of the funding is going really. So as you can see, most of it is going into the global sum. I think it might be about 18%. So I think people have commented on the proportion. The bit that you and then I guess it's worth articulating. GP and R's 104. They're kind of including that there, but it's also included in ours, isn't it, as well? The advice and guidance, LES, which we'll talk about later, that's 80 million.
Enhanced service. They haven't called it a LES, and we don't know if it's a DES.
Because it's not local.
Yeah. And we don't know if it's a NES. It's just an ES, an enhanced service. And the interesting thing we saw in this is it keeps saying the opportunity to participate.
It's optional and opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, it's an opportunity. That's the word. So we're thinking, you know, as this letter stands, it's not necessarily compulsory, which I think might cause some headaches at ICBs if they have some practices that participate in this element of the contract and others that don't. But maybe we'll talk about that a bit more when we get there.
Yeah.
Vaccinations fee uplift, that's worth 18 million. Very, very small is an uplift to PCN workforce streams of 13 million. And the bit that you can't see is SFE uplifts of 12 million. But we'll talk about all of those individually as we go through. But there's
just before we get to that,
so
just to clarify what SFE means, because I think a lot of people may not know, that's the statement of financial entitlement. So that's technically the stuff that backs up the GP contract in terms of payments and things. So I had to go and check that myself. So just to clarify that for everybody out there in the GP learning land.
And we'll talk about which elements they draw our attention to in the letter that have changed in there, but always worth looking at the actual changes in the annex.
Yeah. So that's the total increases that we're seeing. That is a significant increase in terms of the contract value. I don't know how much that equates to in terms of percentage of the NHS budget. We haven't had a chance to look at that yet. And I guess we will probably look at that in time for when the full review comes out in what we assume to be later on in March. And the only reason for doing that is there may be some small adjustments that tend to happen, but it is a significant increase. You'll hear from Katie Bramwell-Stein in a bit as to how much of an increase that might be in terms of equivocal previous contracts. So we'll let her explain that in a second.
Yeah, of course. But in point 2, they say, well, this is a 7.2% cash increase in the GP contract funding envelope. They also say, estimate 4.8% real growth from last year's contract. So they're applying a sort of modest amount of inflation to that. To say actually in real terms, probably a 4.8% growth. So it's good to see that there for transparency. So it's biggest investment in general practice in over a decade. And again, KBS talks about that in the video, which we'll show, and we'll let her express that in her own words.
But I guess the question I've seen on a lot of the forums, the channels and stuff, well, what does that mean in terms of pence per patient or pounds per patient and stuff? So as ever, this is going to vary depending on your practice, your Carhill formula, you know, the prevalence and all the other kind of stuff. But approximately, if you're Carhill 1.0, if you have no significant changes in terms of your populations and that kind of stuff, it's approximately £9.04 increase in your pounds per patient that's registered with you, which I believe takes it up to just over £121 per patient for the GMS contract value. So that's the increase that we're dealing with. So the 7.2% is a slight misnomer, because don't forget some of these increases are outside of the GMS itself. But in terms of GMS contract value, it effectively takes about £121. You'll then have obviously all your leses, your prevalence, all that kind of stuff that modifies the feature in practice. But hopefully that gives you a rough estimate. And the reason why that's important, well, we'll come to that in a second.
Okay, so next point. So in addition to the 189 million, practices will have the opportunity to participate in this advice and guidance enhanced service, which is worth 80 million. So people have talked about this before, and I think we're still awaiting the details of that scheme, and we'll talk about that when we have more details. But there is talk of £20 per advice and guidance made from practice to secondary care, and talk of using that in a much more extensive way, I guess, to manage referrals. But we need to see what that will look like.
So when we get to the detail, the interesting part as well that they put in this is it says pre-referral advice and guidance. So they've added this extra phrase in there, and I don't know what the significance that is. We will find out when the actual contract comes out, but I think that's the key point to be aware of. There is also some local ICB adjustments that can be made, but they have also recommended that this information needs to be, this funding needs to be used as well, from what we can tell from the current offer. So important to recognise, it looks like this funding is going to be to general practices through the ICBs at their discretion, but
there's something about protecting that for this purpose within ICB budgets.
Effectively, so the ICB can't use it for other things. Key point there.
Good, and that's just this word opportunity, which is there. So practices will also have the opportunity to take part in a new enhanced service for advice and guidance. So just interesting that the word opportunity is there. It didn't need to be there in that sentence. Next one. So Gabby, do you want to lead us off with the
point 4? There's this plan of reducing bureaucracy, where Streeting keeps talking about, his red tape bureaucracy changes and all this kind of stuff. And one of those is retiring some QOF indicators to basically recycle them into basically how that will flow. So they're going to retire 32 QOF indicators, and the list of that is in this document. It's in Annex, I want to say B. We'll check when we get down to it and stuff, but it is in the lower pages. So that they're basically clearing those out, and then that funding effectively equates to 212 QOF points. So I'm going to bring on one of the comments that we've already had. So Hannah Robbins, keen to understand whether retired QOF income is being recycled as IMS, VAX, Uplift, and SFE, locum payments and QOF points, etc., or actual drop in income for the aggregates. So these are being recycled. We'll explain how they're being recycled in shortly, but it is effectively that it's not necessarily increased funding that's going into this. They have just changed the way that you get them, and that's explained in the next point.
Okay, so 212 points involved, 71 points with a total of 100 million will be removed outright and invested back into the global sum. Okay.
And that's to basically fund the SFE payments that we talked about earlier. So these come in two parts. Number one, which is the increase in terms of locum and maternity reimbursements and that kind of stuff, and that will vary between, I forgot the numbers, 15.1 and 17 point something percent.
15.9 and 17.1%. You can probably see our notes on the screen as well. Okay, but it's very small for Gandhi to read.
So that will be recycled to pay for those adjustments and those reimbursements. And then the other part that's being recycled to do is to pay for the increase in item of service charge for vaccinations as part of QOF, taking that up by an extra £2 to a total of £12.06. The question is, which vaccinations is that? And this is where we're going to have a look at the table, wasn't it?
Table, yes, and the table was on page
51.
51. Okay,
not this one.
No. Of course, we have the other document. Yes. Now in the computer restart, did that get queued up, Gandhi? I don't think it did. Is the link in the
private chat?
In the private chat. Shall we stop sharing the screen for a second?
Yes, we shall. Okay, so apologies all. So this is down to the slight tech mishap we've had. Whilst Andy's finding that, one thing I'm just going to say, because our regular EGP learners will know I love to do this, because I think it's amazing that we can do this, and let me just bring it up. So we have well over 100 plus live viewers. In fact, we've had well over 100 plus live viewers since about 5 minutes into this live stream. We're currently about 160 odd. So thank you everybody for joining us. We've had loads of people say hi to us. I'm just going to bring on some of those comments as well.
Gandhi, just while you're doing that, could you resend in the private chat, because you sent it to me before the restart of the computer.
So I'm hoping this is the correct one.
Hopefully this will be worth it for.
This is the chaos of going live. Sometimes you just have to accept that things go right and sometimes things go wrong. So let's have a quick look. So we had loads of people saying hi and stuff. Thank you to everybody who has been doing so. You're definitely going to make a quick shout out to friend of the channel, Dustin Saint from Primary Care IT, Lisa Drake from Redmore Health. Ranesh, you're getting a little bit frustrated with the fact, can we just get to the meat of the stuff? We're going to get to that and stuff.
I think we were filling time because of technical difficulties.
Yeah, so we apologise for that. We've had some tech difficulties this morning and stuff and things. And yeah, Dustin's already got a comment in there, which I'm going to bring on. So we'll be interested to see the detail on this and what impact of prevalence for disease registers, as the registers themselves are completely retired completely, but will the KPIs still be based on them? So it's an interesting point that Dustin raises, that obviously QOF is based on prevalence. If you're not keeping the registers in the same way, does that affect your prevalence? But also, how are they monitoring that to make sure that those payments work? So, depending on what system you use, I know in System 1, there is a separate part that gives you your cost per QOF point based on your prevalence. And obviously, your prevalence is based on your coding. But if you don't have the registers, how does that work moving forward? Will be interesting to see.
It's a good point, isn't it? Because I guess that probably we do need to keep the register still, or at least the coding that supports the register. So I guess we still need to do that work, but they're not paying us to do it. So,
so we're going to get to the list of table items that are included. So I'm going to switch this around to a slightly better one so you can see. But this is the table from the SFE entitlement, so the standard financial entitlements that general practice has. This lists the immunisations, vaccinations that the increase of the £2 for the item of service will apply to. Okay, so this is the table. This might be slightly older because I think this is the 2024
I think this gives
list.
the old contract value of 1066.
Yes, so this is not the new details because that will come out again at the end of March when they refresh it. But this is the list of items that is included. Except there are two additions into this that's not on this table. So that is the Hep B immunisation schedule, which is, I've forgotten, I think it's months, 6 months and 1 year, I believe. And MMR plus 6, was it months or years? I can't remember now, Andy, I'm afraid.
I can't remember. People will
check. In fact, I can tell you, I've got it here. Yeah. So Hep B immunisations at birth /4 weeks and 12 months, and then an MMR for those 6 and over. I'm assuming that's 6 years because it doesn't mention. But yeah, okay. So those are the ones where you'll get the increase in item of service payment for giving the vaccinations. Hopefully that helps. Yeah.
Good detail. Excellent. And
we're at number 6 now. Yeah. So the question then comes in terms of what happens with the remaining QOF points. So we talked about the 71 out of that 212. Well, the next part is the remaining 141. So these are going to be recycled and added to basically cardiovascular prevention items. So this is both the CVD QOF, but also throughout some of the other QOF criteria. So in terms of diabetes, cholesterol management, all of those, they are being plumped up to increase in terms of the number of points they're eligible for. However, with that, there is an increase in the criteria to meet them, so the percentages that you'll need to do. So they are harder to achieve. Again, that detail is in the annex below, and we will show you that when we get towards it and things. It's a little bit more complicated, so they haven't actually included your percentages out there.
No, I think it's just a new percentage, isn't it? So, and we didn't have time to compare that with the old percentages. So essentially, they've changed the threshold such that the minimum threshold when you start to get your payments is the same, but the maximum threshold is higher. So you can actually achieve a higher percentage of achievement within your population and be rewarded for that, I guess. But it will be harder to get those maximum rewards.
Yeah, so I guess to answer Arjuna Yoga's question, interested to know if the IMS QOF targets made realistic or achievable. So we just heard that the cardiovascular ones are actually harder to achieve. I guess one of the key things that will come to reflections is the fact that the actual achievement of the IMS ones hasn't changed. It's just the item of service. We'll come to our reflection as to why that's really important and stuff, but it is a bugbear for many of us. But yeah, shall we crack on then?
Yeah, so point 7 is sort of the main point that grabbed all the headlines, I think, when this letter dropped, because for patients out there, this is probably the most sort of visible change that they might anticipate. So it says, we want patients to contact their practice by phone, online, or by walking in, for people who have an equitable experience across these access modes. So this is modern general practice.
Yeah.
There will be a key intervention in the government's, and this will be a key intervention in the government's ambition to end the 8 a.m. scramble. From the 1st of October 2025, practices will be required to keep their online consultation tools open for the duration of core hours for non-urgent appointment requests, medication queries, and admin requests. And this will be subject to necessary safeguards in place to avoid urgent clinical requests being erroneously submitted online. Guidance will be displayed on practice websites and reflected in the wording, reflecting the wording of the patient charter, which is something which we couldn't find that they'd updated or released that wording for practice websites.
What we think is going to happen is that NHS England will publish a patient charter It does specify that when this comes out, practices will be required to place this public access, so your waiting rooms, your website, and this is what practices will be agreeing to in terms of access. So an interesting thing, isn't it, Andy, in that sense?
It is, yeah. So, and I guess this was what was sort of interpreted in the mainstream media as you will be able to make a routine appointment by submitting a request for a routine appointment online. That's how it was characterized, and I guess that's what is enabled by these forms of words here. It'll be really interesting to see what the patient charter says and how that's implemented. And KBS has something to say about that in her video, which we'll go to after we've covered the main points here, because it remains a point of negotiation for the VMA as we move towards the final version of this contract landing, hopefully sometime before April, and definitely before the 1st of October, when all of this needs to happen.
So we've got some extra comments coming on. Sorry, I'm just trying to find a video that's going to be useful for us to show in a second. But a couple of comments that we had. So Dustin's saying, key point here, maximum thresholds are really high, 90%, which means realistically more maximum tolerances / PCAs will need to be used. Potentially, that's quite clear in terms of how that will work. Lisa Drake coming in with, how does the requirement sit with BMA and their collective action guidance? We're coming to that, so don't worry. Any indication from Josh Curry how soon routine needs to be? No, there is no detail on this whatsoever. This is not coming until October, so there is still time till that happens. Wow, comments coming in fast and furious, everyone. Morning all, interesting LI combo, this AI live conversation, I think, about not maintaining LTC registers, how that impacts published data, such as prevalence and impact, may have an impact on health analysis. I'm just going to make this a little bit better. Okay, Dustin back again. Interesting, non-urgent appointments only, quite a change from complete total triage. Yeah, we'll come. I'm going to mention something like that in a second. Mike Neville from IGPM. Upper limits of CVD target phenomenally high. So this is, I think, one of the things many people are concerned about, that the QOF criteria for those recycled QOF points is considerably higher than what it was. Again, we've not been able to figure out how high. So if somebody does know, please let us know, because we've not, unfortunately, with all the stuff we've had to deal with, got to that particular analysis part.
But we can look at the new thresholds, but we've just forgot the old.
And absolutely, we will cover that in more detail when the final contract alpha comes out in the document. But if you've got that now, that would be useful to know. Deprivation, a key thing here in terms of factoring that in, though, and that's definitely the case when it comes to the IMS vaccines, which again, there's been no changes in terms of the achievement levels, which I know has frustrated many, particularly those working in deprived areas. Trisha, NHS, we moved this model in April. It's taken a long time for patients to grasp the changes. Online is quicker. So this is talking about total triage. Wow, guys, you're going crazy on there. It'll be interesting to see how exactly they define open and keep it. Yep, we don't know the definition of that yet from Health View 24. And further, how do you define non-urgent? Further question. Yep, interesting point. Mike, it's in the annex on the NHS. Yes, so there's the changes, but I couldn't see the percentage changes. That might be my weird viewer, but we'll get to that in a second. Trillion, jumping the wording applies must be during core hours. Yep, we agree on that. Connor back in there, as I mentioned, the neighbourhoods. No mention of neighbourhoods in this contract. And Steve, I'm loving it.
I love this. Okay.
Thank you. Oh, gosh. Okay, so we're going to carry on with the document. Feel free to jump in with the comments, guys. We will come back to them as quickly as we can. But we are going to crack on with the rest of this because there's still loads for us to get through. So
it's this GP Connect functionality.
Yeah, so people may remember this. So I was looking back at this because I was doing some review of our views recently, and this was when GP Connect update record hit the news cycles round about, I think it was summertime, it was the end of summertime. That video I put out telling people about the change and what the GPC was recommending and how to switch it off hit over 4,000 views. So you guys really, really, really watched that one. But I think it's important to recognise because of the fact that this is one of the changes that they are agreeing to in the contract to adjust that and what that means. Do you want to go through it, Andy?
Yeah, so by no later than the 1st of October, 25 practices will also be required to ensure the functionality in GP Connect is enabled, which allows read-only access to patient care records. This will apply to other NHS commissioned providers for direct patient care, and also to providers of patient healthcare where the private provider obtains explicit permission from the patient to access their NHS GP care record, and they are providing direct care to the patient.
Mhm.
So, and Katie Balmor-Steiner has some comments about this in her video, which we will show eventually.
Yes, which is what I've just been doing. So I've not been doing the ad bit, so we've just realised that the video is not public.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm just.
Oh, you've made it public. Good.
Yeah.
And allow community pharmacy registered professionals to send consultation summaries into the GP practice workflow, which will reduce administrative burden for general practice teams.
Mhm.
So, yeah, some two-way communication.
And I guess the key point with this, so this is allowing pharmacies, as it says, to write into the record appropriately. There's still some detail on that needs to happen. I think the more interesting one that's going to concern people is the third-party access. So I guess this will be, for example, services. Common ones that I think many people are possibly frustrated and concerned about will be your weight management clinics that are prescribing GLP-1s, and your ADHD clinics that are recommending patients start on particular medications. Where will that line sit? Obviously, other private providers, other third-party providers, including that, some online pharmacies as well, because it does mention about this being the original one being NHS-registered pharmacies. Obviously, not all pharmacies are NHS-registered pharmacies.
Just for clarity, again, is that full read access to the full patient record?
Well, again, detail's not there, but the question is, how far do you go in terms of the detail that you share in order for them to work safely and actually manage that risk themselves, versus patient consent and sharing all that information, which is, as ever, one of the challenging parts when it comes to being the data controllers for us, the GPs, in terms of sharing this data and the liability that sits with that. And Katie gives a great example of that in her comments that we're going to come to when we've got through this. 10 more points and stuff.
Yeah, because we protect certain data, don't we, from online sharing, but actually, where is the line? Given that patients might be going for quite specific, fairly minor things to private providers, do they really need to see as much information as they might have access to? And do we really have a way of identifying which things they can't see at the moment, which we don't? So anyway, let's get on to point 9.
So that's the patient charter that we said that's going to be coming out from NHS England. They haven't published it yet. We don't know when that will come. We will probably cover it when it comes out and stuff. But whether that will also come out with the formal GP contract itself or afterwards, still unclear. Key point, this will need to be on your practice websites. This is something that you are going to agree to sign up to as part of the offer.
Yeah, as part of the contract.
Yeah. Part 10. So now we're into the PCN stuff, okay? So for those of you who are involved in PCNs and want to know what's going on, this is where we get into it, and then we're going to go back to some of the comments after we've covered the next couple of sections about PCNs. Should we do the comments first?
You want to get to comments now?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, actually, we're going to switch that, everyone. So just before we get to PCN stuff, and there is loads to know there, we're just going to go back to some of these comments that actually, some of these are relevant. So first of all, Health You, love seeing us together on the couch. Yeah, it's new for us. We're kind of enjoying it. I don't think this is going to be every live stream, just because it took us a little bit of time to set it up and stuff and things. And obviously requires Andy's house to be empty and stuff at the time. But yeah, we're hoping you like the setup. If you do, leave us a like down below, because that would be really appreciated. Or comment in terms of how we can change it as well. What would work better for you? Heard the comments earlier from, I think, Jayesh about the audio not being as good. I think he said that he could hear us, but actually it was not as good as normal. And that probably is because of the quality of mics we're using compared to, obviously, our fixed mics are far better quality and stuff. But hopefully it's okay.
We'll see. Give us some feedback.
Yeah. Dustin saying, as ever, Dustin with the figures. So Cole, so these are the changes in terms of the criteria for the reconcile QOF changes. So Col 004, 35 to 50%, Hype 04, 77 to 85%, Hype 009, 80 to 85%, STI, which is the stroke one, 14, 73 to 90%, STI 15, which is another criteria on that, 86 to 90%, CHD 015, 77 to 90%, and CHD 16, 86 to 90%, and diabetes 036. 36. There's loads of diabetes ones. 78 to 90%. Significant changes that we're seeing there. Crazy, isn't it, Andy?
Yes.
So, Health View, BMA. Let's go back to the different view, because this is a bit more engaging, hopefully, for you. BMA summary document that confused the real one in GP Connect update record and GP Connect access records. That made me smile. Little things. Lisa, wonder if any of us discussed the medical liability of this. Took ages just to get GP online access off the ground. Who's supporting these other contributors? Lots of stuff to go through, as we said, in terms of how that's going to work. Nicola Lawton, CAIP, we're going to come, requirement item 2 was a precursor for the core hours. Yes, I think I know what you mean. We're going to come to that in the next section, which is about the CAIP changes.
Yes, that's coming up.
Yep. Jamie, thank you both. Implications you have for the contract for PCNs, we're coming to that, so that's in the R section, so don't worry, stick around, Jamie, for that. Connor, we should be using pharmacy a lot more, part of the health ecosystem. Absolutely.
So it enables that, doesn't it? Or supports that.
And interestingly, many of us obviously know about GPs doing collective action. There is lots of noise that pharmacies are about to do a similar form of collective action, which will impact patient care in different ways. So they are struggling in completely different ways, but similar at times in terms of how general practice is, and definitely hearing lots of coming through that collective action for pharmacies will be starting soon because of how they've been cannibalized with their contracts and services and stuff. Is there an indicator that Labour accept want self-funded private patient health could be an integral long-term player of the NHS sustainability?
That's an interesting question. I'm not. I think that this certainly enables more engagement with the independent sector. They say private here, it was independent the other week. So quite possibly they're enabling it, aren't they?
Possibly.
So.
Steve Hagen, your comment is great. Unfortunately, it's massive. I'm going to share it, but I don't think we can cover it all because it's huge. But effectively, talk about different models and different healthcares, and that GP in England are trapped in an unsustainable system, and therefore maybe the payment systems need to change. Coming to that in a second. Tricia in the NHS, GP Connect info being written as GP record and then GP being responsible for that data. Yeah, that's going to make it harder and things. Yeah, exactly. In terms of blood pressures, Rupesh, what does it mean? Quaff income will be 16,000 for average list size and historically practiced and well. So I think this is because of the change in criteria. There have been some comments that some practices will suffer because they won't achieve as much of that quaff points as a result of it.
And there's a potential health equity, inequality, deprivation issue around these changes. I would suggest.
Yep. Dustin coming in with no mention of IF at all. Also no mention of INTs, very light on PCN details. Yes, I suspect that will be in the full contract details because they tend to slip in quite a few things when that happens and stuff.
Yeah, and of course the DES contract might drop or change separately. It's not necessarily part of the same negotiation round.
Potentially,
may come separately.
It's interesting. Last year, when the contract came out, there was very little talk about the PCN side of things. It was obviously many people focused on the GP contract, but actually there were quite a few changes that incorporated some of that, and we're coming on to talk about that right now.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So point 10. So this is another one of the big ones that I think caught a lot of attention in the general practice sphere. So the additional roles reimbursement scheme will increase in flexibility to support PCNs to respond to their local workforce requirements. We will combine the funding in the 2 Rs pots. So I think that's GP Rs and practice nursing Rs and standard Rs, integrate a single pot for reimbursement of patient-facing staff costs with no restrictions on numbers or type of staff who are covered, including GPs and practice nurses. So that's quite a big one, isn't it?
It is. So just to clarify what that means. So in summer, just after the government took over, one of Wes Streeting's big things that he created was obviously the GP&Rs. Now, it had a more professional name, but that's basically what everybody calls it. And as a result of that, that allowed for newly qualified doctors to be employed under the Rs scheme. It was very restrictive. And there were a couple of criteria with that meant that they had to be within 2 years of working, not have to have a substantial post before. And obviously, one of the comments that many people, particularly those working in PCNs, had was that the funding just wasn't commensurate in order to make it happen. That's why many places have really struggled to get it up, and why even a month ago, NHS England pretty much put out a plea telling PCNs to crack on and hire more people because the money wasn't being used. This is interesting because of 2 reasons. Number one, they have increased the amount of funding to a more modest level. So they've increased it by
0.11, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the increase is from 7311 3, which is the bottom of the salary GP range, to 82,418. So this is I think the full-time equivalent rate for these roles, which represents the lower quartile of the salary GP range. I guess these are less experienced, newer GPs. So that's an uplift of £9,305, which I guess is more than 10%.
Yeah, which takes us from what some places were saying about 7,300 a session to about 8,000 plus a session. So it is an increase. It's still, I think many people probably say it's still not where people would want it to be, but let's be honest, there's an increase. An increase is useful. The big thing about this is the fact that it's now being amalgamated with the full R's pot, and the restrictions on how many GPs you can have per PCN are gone.
So this will be interesting as primary care networks are looking to the next few years and potentially looking at reconfiguring their workforce. There's now the opportunity to employ potentially more core general practice roles in terms of practice nurses and GPs, although there's restrictions on what type of staff they are, and with nurses it particularly needs to be additional work that is not currently being done or covered by practice nurses. But it's really interesting to have that flexibility, and that might have quite far-reaching implications for how PCNs choose to structure themselves and what they focus on potentially.
And I guess also the inclusion of practice nurses into ours is also a significant change. Now, important to note that we don't have the detail on what they mean by practice nurses, and the reason why that's important is that many people remember last year they included enhanced nurses into the R's funding arrangements, and that was the main R's pot. But actually, it was very restrictive because very few people qualified under the term of an enhanced nurse, because you required you to have particular types of training that was very minimal in terms of availability and stuff. So we still don't have the detail on what they mean by practice nurse. Does that mean what level? Does that mean we qualified? Unclear. But
one imagines there will be some restrictions on it, but that's interesting. The other thing also, they're now clear that a proportionate employer on costs will also be included within the overall maximum reimbursement amount, which PCNs will be able to claim for those roles, I guess. So that's actually a significant amount. That's insurance, pension contributions. So that's quite a lot. I think that's quite a big deal as well.
Yes. I think it's important to recognise that this is going to create some level of anxiety, I think, in PCNs, because of the fact that because the total cap in terms of the number of GPs that can be employed is gone, there's potential for some practices, some networks to say, actually, we don't want any of the other roles, we just want GPs. And that's going to be a concern for many people involved in primary care networks, absolutely the R staff, absolutely the PCN clinical directors, even the practices, because there are obviously employment liability aspects that come into play if that was to be done. I personally don't think that's the right decision to make for many networks. I think for certain places they absolutely can work, but I think the R's have had benefit. From my perspective, I know that I'm not. There are many people who don't believe the same thing. Important to recognise though that the restrictions on the GP in R's still apply. Newly qualified within 2 years of qualification cannot have had a substantive role within the PCN network. That same rule applies to the nurses as well, so they couldn't have worked in that PCN before for them to be employed, or for any of the practices that are constituents within that PCN as well. And there was another one that I've forgotten. Apologies.
I can't remember. Maybe it'll come to you. Maybe it'll come to you later. But you're describing quite a restricted kind of pool of potential people, particularly on the general practice.
Who will still need some additional support and supervision as well. So it's not that it's off you go. And reality is they're probably not going to stay if you said that as well. So there are these considerations to make and stuff and things.
Okay, but flexibility is what a lot of people were asking for. There's also a question. I mean, this is expanding R's in GP, and there's a question as to whether actually that's been successful and whether that's the right place to employ GPs. Many people might say, actually, I'd just rather just employ GPs just through the practice. That's how we've always done it. That's how it works better. That's how we integrate better with our teams rather than working across a group of practices.
Absolutely. And I wasn't going to jump to the comments, but Jay Shapuri's made a great one, which actually I don't still know the answer to. So after 2 years post-qualification, do the GPs have to give up their role if they're enrolled, or can they continue? I should know this. I don't know this. I'm really sorry, Jay. So there's any of our, and I'm going to point this out, any of our 240 plus live viewers know the answer to this question, please stick it in the comments and stuff. I'd love to know. I keep meaning to check the answer on this, and I keep forgetting.
Is the answer no? Is it checkable, or is it an oversight that people haven't looked that far?
I don't know. I think the problem is I can't remember the answer.
Point of employing them? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it's 2 years at the point of employment. I can't remember the terms of what happens when they get to 2 years. I think originally, from the original criteria, they said they could continue, but I don't know if that will still apply, because what happens if you employ someone at 1 year and 11 months?
Which you could have done already, and they could have already gone beyond that. One hopes they can continue to be employed, but worth checking. It's a very good practical question.
Yeah. And comment here from Tabula Master: PCNs ours have not been good for general practice, was much better before. I think there's difference of opinions. Like I said, I think some of the roles have been really beneficial for primary care. I think some of them have not proven their worth everywhere. But I completely understand why people also feel that they may not have been as beneficial and stuff. But we'll come to those in a second. And Jamie,
that's a very good point from Jamie. Actually.
Yeah, so think out loud. My trainer's hand could be an excellent opportunity to retain GPs locally from training. Yes, absolutely. Key thing that's not mentioned in this: there is no comment as an uplift to the actual R's budget that PCNs hold. So remembering that most PCNs are probably at and possibly even over their R's allocated budget, with the shift of having GPs now unrestricted, they may not actually have the budget to employ more. And that's
without potentially restructuring.
Well, without restructuring, without changes and stuff and things. And I think that's an important point to note. There's possibility of natural drift that you might have with people leaving and moving. But yeah, this is a question that's harder for us to answer, but one that we will be trying to tackle and answer for you at the PCN Plus conference in April, which
23rd of April,
yes,
which is sold out.
Sold out, I'm afraid. So if you were planning on joining us live, at the moment there are no tickets.
There's a reserve list, right?
There is
that's being operated, so that you can still. It may not be set up yet, but I believe you can still go to either of the websites, the Business of Primary Care or Ben Gowland's podcast, and sign up for the reserve list. I think that's going live soon, but you can join us online. Online tickets are available.
Yeah, so me and Andy will be running the hybrid aspects of it, making it virtual as well. I guess the reason why we're mentioning this right now is actually we haven't mentioned on the channel, but as of yesterday, we were completely sold out in terms of face-to-face tickets. Secondly, that we are going to be including a session in that conference talking about employment aspects and various other changes that are going to happen. And really fortuitous that we decided to check that in, given the fact that this is going to be a hot topic, I think, for many PCNs, as they having to look at how they might have to restructure employment and all the other kind of stuff. Tara absolutely is going to be a powerful voice in that. So if you do want to hear more about that and more in-depth analysis, because obviously this will be posted.
And hear what the other delegates have to say, because there'll be lively chat and networking aspects. Even online networking is a feature of the online conferences that we run, so there'll be an opportunity to see how other people are handling this across the country. And the delegates tend to be primary care network clinical directors, network managers, people from ICB and place positions. So it's really some kind of good caliber of people there. And
just before we get to the CAIP stuff, so comments coming from others. So Sarah A, I understand that RGP can be kept on as long as they're under 2 years at the start of the contract. Which I agree, Sarah. The bit I'm not quite sure on is how long past 2 years you can keep having them on, because I suspect there may be something coming through at some point that says, what happens in potentially 3 years' time.
Yeah, or 10 years' time.
That's the bit I don't think I've seen an answer to.
Maybe it's not been planned for yet, and we'll need planning for in the future.
Okay, so next, CAIP. So this is the other big part of the PCN DES changes or adjustments, shall we say, that comes through. And this is with the CAIP funding. So just as a reminder to everybody out there in EGP learning and general practice land, so the Capacity and Access Improvement Plan is now going to be going into its 3rd year of running. This was when they reconciled a lot of the IIF payments and made them available as capacity and access. Year 1 was focused very much along basically getting practices and networks to gear up for better telephony of the better purchasing framework and cloud-based telephony, better purchasing framework, as well as various other changes to infrastructure. Last year was more around basically a bit of a fudge to provide some resources through the PCN for practices just to manage access, and a big chunk of that was paid unqualified. You didn't have to do anything for it, you just had to sign up to the DARES. And the 30% was the local payment, which equated to 87 million odd or so. It was then validated against 3 different criteria, which was care navigation, online access, and making sure that you've got signed up to the DPN notices for the better telephony and stuff. So many practicing networks hopefully have been able to achieve a proportion, if not most of those and things. Obviously, the online access one is the one I think many people had issues with. That's changed. That's the key point. So how has it changed? Are you going through this, Andy?
You will. I will have a go, Gandhi, and then you can break it down.
Okay, fair enough.
But essentially, so it'll continue to be worth 87.6 million, and we had to do some fishing around to see whether that was the same value as it was before, and ultimately, we agreed that it was.
Yeah.
And so now it's going to be split into 2 domains. So one of them is focused on supporting modern general practice access. So supporting access, that'll be 58.4, and then the other 29.2 will be focused on work for PCNs to undertake around population health management, particularly risk stratifying patients in accordance with need to identify those that would most benefit from continuity of care.
Yep.
And we don't have details in terms of what that will look like, but it's just interesting in its focus on population health management, risk stratification, and the mention of continuity of care there, because this is something that was trailed as being part of the new GP contract, and this would be important. And I think this is the only place where it's mentioned, Gandhi, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So this is currently how they intend to address continuity of care, which is quite a small part of the contract, but still a meaningful amount of money.
Yeah, so I guess the headlines from all of that in summary, so the CAIP total pot hasn't changed. It took us a while to figure that out, actually. So the total pot hasn't changed. It's still at 292 million, of which 70% of that will be paid direct to practice. I think that's about 204 million. And then out of the remaining 30%, 2/3 of that will be paid as per modern general practice. And again, we don't have criteria detail on what that looks like yet, but that was the 3 criteria I mentioned earlier from this financial year. So they will probably change in some way. And then a third of that, so 33.3% of the 30%, is then going to be paid as this payment for PCNs doing some stratification work to focus on continuity of care.
So okay, so that's how that's landing. So we need to await the details to see what the focus on general practice looks like, and the risk stratification activity will look like.
They then mentioned there's going to be some further changes to SFE payments. So we talked a bit about some of those and stuff. So that was the locum payment changes and that kind of stuff, which aren't identified in that particular section. And then they then talk about the process of the contract change and stuff and things that come from there. I think that was the main executive summary, if I remember rightly, Andy.
Yeah, that's it. Yours sincerely, Amanda Doyle.
Yep. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you a response video from Katie Bramwell-Stainer, our chair of the GPC. And the reason why we're showing you this is a couple of points. One, because Katie summarizes quite a lot of what we just talked about. I put it in the private chat for you, Andy. Yeah.
Thanks, Gandhi.
And what I will also do for everybody watching with us live is I'm going to stick this in the chat as well for you to have a look at if you want to separately. So we've just uploaded this morning. It's from Katie herself. And it is on the EGP Learning channel, so you're welcome to have a look at it and stuff to do that. Live won't see that comment come up on your platform, so unfortunately, on Twitter, it won't come up. It will only come up on the YouTube or the Facebook channel where you're watching. But we will show you that video on screen as well if you want to watch it. In addition to that, it's about 5 minutes long, and I know that sometimes showing videos and stuff, people feel, well, why are you showing it? I think it's important to hear from Katie. It tackles some of the key points, and we will then give you our reflections on this. And following that, we'll then show you the detailed stuff that is not mentioned anywhere else. So you do need to come back and watch this, because otherwise you're going to miss out on the stuff that no one's talked about and things. But yeah, shall we bring it on, Andy?
Yeah, and if people could just let us know that they can hear the sound when it starts as well, so that we can.
I think we're going to stay in the bottom corner watching it with you. So yeah, let's go for it.
Hi colleagues, I just want to explain a bit more behind today's headlines, In case you've been stuck in surgery all day, GPC England has tentatively agreed a deal for 25 and 26, but only if Wes Streeting writes to all of us, setting out his intention to go to Treasury to ask for funds to negotiate a wholesale new NHS GP practice contract within this Parliament, which he needs to do before the conference on the 19th of March. Because that's what we need if we're genuinely going to save and rebuild our profession back from the brink. I spoke to Wes Streeting, Stephen Kinnock and senior civil servants yesterday. We are on the same page, but we still need those written assurances. So too do we need the special conference of LMCs, because this is still a fragile deal with a lot of hope and goodwill needed. 3 areas are going to require immediate ongoing to determine our next steps. One's around online consultation excess, which is a red line for the Secretary of State. It's given him the headlines this morning that he wanted about fixing the front door to the NHS and ending the 8 a.m. scramble. It does not mean that we're going to have to find unlimited capacity for same-day urgent care. We have warned government repeatedly this policy risks leading diminished GP access and increased GP waiting lists. We've got a working group that's going to look at how this can be safely managed and what's needed from online platforms to safely mitigate the risks and manage the demand and capacity mismatch. If we aren't there by the 1st of October, then we'll need to return to the negotiating table. Number 2, GP Connect. The plan is for NHS registered pharmacists to gain access to write in the record for Pharmacy First. Their clinical decisions mean their liability. And for third parties to be private providers working under NHS contracts, but we need to be very careful around defining direct care. My sex worker patient who gets her ears microsuctioned at Specsavers is not going to want her full history shared. We're going to need to embed Caldecott principles here before we can be sure it's safe to switch on in October. The Joint GP IT Committee will be taking this forward with GPC England. And finally, GPs in Rs. Yes, it's still crap. It was NHS England's red line, and no, it's not improved. Do you want it to improve? We want money going into core so that more GPs can be recruited into practices as salaried GPs and partners, not spread across God knows how many practices and 50,000 patients. There's now a single Rs pot. Split it equally between your practices. Spend it on the roles you need. If you decide in the future that you want to restructure your teams on the back of this, then please follow strong HR principles and sound employment law. The BMA can and will help, but just take stock first and don't rush. The money. The headline money is helpful. It's 889 million. 88% of that is going into practice baselines. And then there's the 80 million around advice and guidance on top, all in 1 year. That 969 million headline in 1 year compares very well to a very similar number that was spread across the 5 years in the PCN DES. But the big deal is a new substantive contract. So what does this mean for collective action? Well, much of the collective action menu will be superseded if 25-26 goes as planned. So we'll need to update it, reframe it and consolidate it around safe working guidance principles, which have been our policy for the past decade, which is still our policy, and local contracts and commissioning gaps where your LMC is vital in galvanising collective bargaining. We're no longer in dispute with government, but that cannot and should not get ICBs who are perpetuating these commissioning gaps off the hook. So we shall shift our focus accordingly. When you drill down to an average practice, assuming a Cahill of 1.0, assuming an average list size of just over 10,000, you're looking at an additional £9.40 per patient. Now, we reckon the budget pressures represent in the ballpark of just under £3 per patient, so let's not get carried away. The corrected SFE reimbursements erosion is great to hire locums and get cover. The increased £2 on childhood IMS is welcome, but we need proper contract change because the 2004 GMS contract is broken. QOF, yeah, it's much simpler, but it will be quite tough. But it has been modelled to correct for deprivation, and there are other minor little bits of flexibility which will be really welcome and which we will explain in due course. So, ultimately, this is a promising start. We are on the train towards recovery. We are not yet at the destination. In fact, we are miles off, but at least we are now finally heading in the right direction with a government that is listening and a government that is acting on what we've said. Enjoy your weekends and we'll speak soon.
Hi there.
So everyone, we have just gone through and heard from Katie Bramble-Stainer, our chair of GPC, and she talks about a variety of different things. I need to get rid of that so that we can see us again. And we're going to just talk about some of the comments that she's made there. There's a variety of information that she's given. I think the key thing that when we listened to this video a couple of times was just simply the fact that this is step one in terms of the contract changes. That's the thing I took from this, that it very much is seeing the shoots of possibly some changes happening for general practice, but it's not the end stage. This is the initial phase, and this is very much with a view for having a wholesale contract negotiation for next year.
Yeah, so I think I took from Katie's video. I mean, I don't want to repeat what she said, but that there is still some areas of ongoing discussion that she was commenting on, and that actually she feels that this is a good start, but it's contingent on agreement at the LMC conference on the 19th of March, I think that she said. Feels on the same page as the Department of Health, feels the government is listening, which was good to hear in terms of how negotiations are going. At the end, still some areas of ongoing discussion around that online consultation access for routine appointments. Yeah, what does that mean? And that doesn't mean unlimited capacity, and that came through as an anxiety when we were looking at it, and in the comments today. Also some concerns about GP Connect record sharing, and we thought that her example of a sex worker going to have their ears syringed at a private provider and quite how much of their history is relevant was really powerful way actually of expressing that issue about how much data is it necessary to share to deliver care and appropriate to share. Also, I think the BMA generally not been a fan of GP in Rs, and that was sort of reiterated there as well. Around GP in Rs, he said, the combining of the Rs funding, take your time and follow strong HR principles. So it's maybe anticipating maybe some rash decisions from primary care networks potentially, and encouraging people to
absolutely
be cautious.
That's the thing that we felt came across quite strongly, that there is this potential emotion for many practices and networks to shift how they currently use their Rs budgets from April onwards. I think mindful of the fact that there are significant questions and concerns around employment aspects and stuff that need to be answered before practices suddenly make that reflex to say, right, off we go kind of thing. Because actually, I'm not forgetting, these are people's lives. And also, again, how much value is that going to bring under the current restrictions that also apply with those GPs that can be employed versus, the current service that sometimes is often not seen, I think, in some places, in terms of what's happening and stuff. And obviously where that liability of that employment sits as well. So is that with the practices? Is that with the employment organisations? Is that with the lead employer, which could be one of the practices, or another organisation? There's lots to unpick, and we will be doing that for your PCN plus 25 as well. So there you go.
I just say, I mean, a lot of the population health ambition that the government have is quite dependent on personalised care roles, in my opinion, and care coordination. So, there's a risk that is at risk if general practice moves more towards practice nursing and GP roles. I think we're all trying to articulate that in one way or another. I also heard the words, "We are no longer in dispute with the government." I think I heard that.
Yes. So officially, collective action is changed. I don't think it's over, and as Katie mentioned, certain aspects of what many people assume to be collective action is not going to change from the GPC's perspective. So particularly safe working, that is not changing. That Katie mentioned, that's been the BMA's policy for the past few years, decade or whatever, things she mentioned. But important to note that some aspects of the collective action changes are going to change because they have been addressed in this particular contract being brought forward. Key thing in this is that there's still a time frame for this not to happen. So she mentioned that the special conference of LMCs, which is on the 19th of March, is still going ahead, and that's still planned to happen. And if they haven't had it in writing from West Streeting that there will be a wholesale negotiation of the GP contract, then actually this may still end up becoming an imposed contract. That's what I took from her comments in that this is not we have accepted this is all rosy. There are still some stages that need to happen, and until they happen, we may still end up in an unusual situation that we thought we weren't going to have.
It's good. It creates a bit of a deadline for the government to get things in place by then, which is good negotiating positioning, I think. So we look at the annexes next, and there's quite a number of pages of them. How do you want to tackle this, Gandhi?
There is quite a few. Just before we do, I'm going to go back to just a couple of these comments, just because I really want to go through. So Steve mentioned that we need to cut our own sound. Apologies. So Andy did tell me to do that, and I stopped him. And the reason for that is that I've realised that if we take ourselves off StreamYard, then you won't hear the screen share.
But I'm not sure that's true, and we'll talk about that afterwards.
Yes, okay. And secondly, mentioned from Healthy24, it feels like Gogglebox. So definite shout out to Shankar and stuff, who's doing some amazing work down in London and stuff. But yeah, absolutely.
We need some biscuits on a coffee table.
Well, I'm fasting, so yeah, day 2 of fasting, so hence, yeah, that's a bit trickier, but absolutely next time we can look at that. So yeah, back to the contract. So there's still stuff to go through. This is the stuff that is basically being missed, so more detail. So we want to cover some more detail that's in here. Now, we've covered a lot of the headline stuff. Absolutely, that's there. But if we go down, I think if we just scroll over some of these, we can cover them. So it talks about 7.2% cash growth. It gives you the details of the 2.8% increase in salaries in 2A. Now, we're going to talk about national insurance rises in a second. That's in the what's missing part. But I think it is important to be aware of the fact that there's a question about this. And even Katie mentioned it when she talked about the £9.04 uplift per practice. From the BMA's calculations, NI increases and stuff will be approximately £3 per patient. So this is potentially looking at being included in the uplift. So actually, you've got about £6 per patient to play with in terms of increased cost.
Interesting. People might have noticed that in the House of Lords, I think yesterday or on Thursday, the House of Lords voted to make an amendment to the budget changes around NI to exempt general practice in the same way, or protect general practice in the same way that the rest of the NHS would be protected. The House of Lords don't have the final say in terms of legislation. A revising house, it goes back to the House of Commons. So that might not happen, but that's just something.
Well, I think that's the concern many people have, but the reality is that it may not still happen because the final decision will be the House of Commons, which obviously Labour have the majority, and they previously voted it down. So whether it will go through or not, I think this is a key point to contact your local MPs to say, make it happen. Otherwise, this is going to be an issue. But there is potentially some leeway in that and stuff and things. But yeah, there is a question. And Steve has put it in the chat, so I'm going to bring it on. So I need to switch my screen. It's Dr. Steve Taylor. If you haven't seen Dr. Steve Taylor's stuff, his infographics are bonkersly amazing. Hoping that HOL, can't think.
House of Lords
will be accepted, but then they will take the £3 back.
well, maybe
not, because I don't think the timing of that works, to be honest. But we will see. It'll be interesting to see what happens at that point. So they then talk about the core practice contract and some of it.
Can I just highlight point 3 here? Further uplift may be made following the government's response to the Doctors and Dentists Pay Review Body for 25-26. So they're assuming a 2.8%, I guess, inflationary increase in salaries, and then maybe more on top of that, they say. Because in previous years they were awarded 6% last year, for example, and then there was an additional change to funding came through to support that.
Yep, absolutely. So core practice contract changes. So then it talks about the QOF changes that we mentioned. So the fact that they're getting rid of 32 QOF criteria, reconciling them, those points will then be changed into different aspects to both cover the increase in costs, increase of payments for the vaccinations, as well as the SFE payments about locum reimbursements. And unfortunately, part of that is also making the CVD criteria more
difficult at the higher end.
Those points are being allocated, so there are more points available, but on the compensation they are harder to achieve, which we talked about, and a great summary there from Dustin Sain that we mentioned earlier that showed the percentage changes and stuff that come with that.
So does that mean kind of in the wash for the same achievement we'll get more? more money.
I think
is that the correct way to interpret it?
Well, no. So because I think that the change is you will need to achieve better, but you potentially will get more money if you do make that achievement. If you do the same achievement what you've had, I still think it equates to a loss.
Okay, so the distribution is to the higher
Yeah.
end rather than across the board.
I believe so, but again, we will need to look at the detail, which we'll come into in a second and things. In order to support, so this talks about the CVD prevention stuff, and then those saw technical changes to QOF that bring indicators in line with NICE guidance. That's in Annex D, which we'll get to in a second. These often tend to be very minor changes, which we've analysed in more detail when we've had the full contracts, just because they tend to change, if I'm being honest. So
there's sort of repetition and expansion on the main points, isn't there?
Yeah.
Generally, as we go through the annex.
So this is the SFE payments changes that it talks about in terms of the adjustments. So we talked about 15.9% and 17.1% shift in terms of remuneration. And this is around sickness, absence, prolonged study leave, for example, and various other aspects and things. And that they're adjusting them from there. There's 12 million allocated to that. It then talks about the vaccine changes. I think there was something a little bit more detailed than this. There's 2 changes to the vaccine. Yeah, here we are. So part A. So 2 changes to the childhood vaccination schedule driven by the discontinuation of Mentorix vaccine, including an additional dose of Hib-containing 6-in-1 vaccine offered at new immunisation visit at 18 months of age. That's it. That is a new visit, isn't it, Andy?
I think so. I'm not deep in the vaccinations at my practice.
Okay, and the second, I don't think there's a vaccination visit at 18 months.
3 years, 4 months.
Yeah, so it looks like there's a new vaccination point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Practice managers out there,
I'm not going to comment.
nurses out there, tell us. Me and Andy, unfortunately, are not 100% up to date in the actual schedule. I leave that up to my amazing practice nurses to deal with, and our practice manager. But it looks like there is an extra vaccination point now being included. I don't know if that was planned or not, but okay. The second dose of MMR vaccine brought forward from 3 years and 4 months to a new immunisation visit at 18 months to improve the coverage. I guess that's something that's very keen, that we obviously improve our MMR vaccination rates and stuff. The exchange of MenB and PCV vaccines with the childhood schedule subject to ministerial agreements. That's yet to happen. A change to the adult shingles program affecting new evidence on the evidence of the vaccination broader severely immunocompromised. So I think that's different criteria, people. And the potential introduction of a varicella vaccine, so chickenpox vaccine that they have in other countries. Again, that's pending ministerial assent. An amendment to record the dry blood spot test at risk babies, allowing the recording to take place between 12 and 18 months. So reconciliation data and stuff and things. So those details have not been covered elsewhere. There's more to come. Don't worry, there's still more data. But these changes, I think, are going to be part of the contract. And then it obviously mentions about the uplift in the item of service payment, which for childhood IMS would be very valued. Not for flu jabs, which is, I guess, the key one, that there's still this question about flu vaccinations and what that means for practices, because some of you may or may not remember we covered this a couple of weeks back, that actually flu vaccination in particular and potentially all immunizations being delegated to the ICBs to manage. So the concept of particularly having vaccination centres instead of it being general practice that delivers this is a possibility. And obviously that raises questions in terms of some of the data showing, so whether the GP update record changes will have an implication in that as well. But I think there's, these aspects to be mindful of in terms of how that works and stuff. I've got to stop saying and stuff. Yeah. So the total increase is there, and then it mentions about I can't remember this paragraph, Andy, I'm afraid.
So there's a lot of information in the annexes, isn't it? It may be that we have to pick out
we'll go down
what jumps to us.
So just confirmation from Liam Mannion. Thank you for that. The 18-month vaccine will be a new extra appointment.
Oh, thank you.
So there is some extra stuff in there. So even though the payments are going up, there's a new vaccine. Does that a good thing? I don't know. I would love to hear from you what you think. Is that a good thing or not a good thing? Or who knows? Very short paragraph next in terms of online consultations, which reflects the fact that we have absolutely no detail as to what this means, and I think that's important for us to share.
And it was one of the big headlines of this sort of announcement to the public as well, but details to follow about how that will work. Similarly, I think they're just sort of restating the objectives they stated before around enabling GP Connect to those additional NHS and private providers and community pharmacies having the ability to write into the record or introduce data into the record, but that might need to be acted on by practices, of course. So that needs to be worked out how that will work.
So this is not something that's been mentioned. So patient safety strategy. So there was a change that was made in terms of practice being included in more safeguarding aspects of sharing of data, and this is confirming that still needs to be there. I have to admit, we haven't read this one in full detail. So
yeah, I mean, this dropped a few days ago, so there are some aspects of the appendix we've not quite got our head around.
But this is basically continuing that aspects of the information sharing that needs to happen, and this is part of the new kind of way that information is being shared across services, particularly with a focus on child safeguarding and that kind of thing. So this is just confirming that still needs to happen, and that practice will need to be able to download individuals recording patient safety events being able to download a copy of the record for purposes of supporting appraisal and revalidation. Ooh, that's interesting.
Okay. Okay, fine.
Okay, that's a bit different.
I didn't know that was a requirement of appraisal and revalidation. Maybe that's a change coming. Okay.
Point 17 talks about the patient charter that we've already mentioned.
Awaited
effectively. Yeah,
it's coming soon.
Point 18 then talks about registering patients out of area. I don't believe there was any change in this, but we were just going to read it quickly to confirm, because some of the more detailed stuff was coming up later. The contrary requirements for commissioners to register patients out of area, provide safeguards with practice lists expanding rapidly, which we know is happening in many places. I know my practice is going, woo!
Yeah, like lots of flats being
we have a right book bear with, because we get absolutely no access to those Section 106 monies, not that many practices do anyway. These are controls need to seek approval of their plans to enable commissioner oversight of safety and effectiveness. So some suggestion in there that actually the commissioners have to have this on board in terms of the practicing increases and things. And the trigger for approval being required by the commissioner deemed following consultation with the LMC. Nice to hear that's included. At the point of such an application required, contractors' panel list should be closed to new out-of-area registrants until the commissioner is assured the arrangements for contractor has in place. Making the decision, the commissioner should always be able to seek and maintain patient choice of the GP practice. Interesting.
Dissolution of partnerships. This is interesting, and I need some thought about what the implication of this is. But the GP contract regulations were amended to make it clear that the GMS contracts can be terminated in the situation where there is no clear successor when a partnership dissolves. So there's lots of different circumstances that could cover, really. I mean, I guess when people hand back their contracts, often it's, I mean, sometimes it is dissolved and dispersed, but quite often it continues. And, caretaker is found and then a new provider is found. And I guess it says contracts can be terminated in a situation where there's no clear successors. So I guess sometimes currently they do, sometimes they don't. So I guess they can in some circumstances. I guess I wonder whether that might give ICBs more control over successor organisations that might take over partnerships. It's interesting. I think we need to.
There's not a lot of detail there. I think what it probably reflects is the fact that we have had situations where practices have had to close. Katie talked about that, and the fact that a quarter of practices have shut over the past 10 years. And that actually, does this mean that ICBs have more options in terms of what to do with that, and that they don't necessarily have to find a caretaker, which I think would be a negative situation for the local populations, because there's a question of obviously that en masse happening, and it comes down to, I guess, the size of the population that happens with.
Okay, that will be.
I think that's one to watch.
It's just interesting that it's there.
If we have any GPC people watching us, please help us understand that one in a bit more detail. I might go and ask David Wrigley this one as usual. Violent patients. So it talks then about violent patient schemes, and in particular as practices having support in terms of being able to manage patients who are violent. So there's just a little bit more detail in that. The process for removal will be made clearer. So at the moment, there's a couple of processes of removal based on 8-day removals, off listing intently, or within 30 days. So I think there's going to be some more information come through, particularly with the violent patient aspects of things. And effectively that there are steps that you need to go through. It talks about police reports being made after this period, and that possibly that would need to happen in terms of removals. That's the way I'm interpreting it. Does that sound okay to you?
Yes, have it alongside, so that you need to do those things together. Again, I think they're probably even more detail when the actual contract changes are made clearer to us.
And then amendments in terms of managing patient lists. This was I've forgotten this one, I'm afraid. Apologies, everyone.
I'm processing a lot of information this morning.
Yeah, so it mentions in a smaller part that the time frame for deregistration will reduce from 6 months to 3 months in terms of managing this when a patient is no longer known to NHS England. So I guess this is if they leave care. That's interesting, because I believe that the requirements for NHSK is the fact that you're only resident in the country for 6 months. So if that's changed to 3 months,
okay, so people could find themselves deregistered and then needing to re-register when they return.
That's an interesting one. Okay. Well, obviously, we haven't got into the weeds of this particular one yet. And then change the SFE, care home adjustments for dispensing payments. So this was just about adjusting the care home. I suspect this is for the care home LES payments that will only be paid for now if it's a CQC registered nursing and residential homes. So if they're not CQC registered, then they won't count, which I think will be a fair minority of places nowadays, but I think it's just tying up possibly some loose ends. And enable claims for high volume personally administered vaccines to be returned either by a new digital portal or current process. And I think that's to do with vaccination schedules and stuff and things that are happening.
So DES changes.
Yep. So it talks about our changes that we talked about. We've already covered a lot of this in the earlier sections in terms of the detail, and particularly it's got more of the information around that. Reflecting that some GPs were, okay, so this might be interesting in 31, Andy, because we missed this one. Uplift representing local authority. The year reflecting that some GPs were entering their second year on the scheme. Proportionate employer costs will also be included in the overall maximum reimbursement amount, as in 24-25, or the maximum reimbursement for those GPs outside of London, and maximum reimbursement including London waiting, which is set out in the contract specs.
Don't think it answers the question. No. In terms of what happens if people have been in that post for multiple years, potentially in the future.
So a point we still need to get to and stuff. It then talks about the CAIP, which we've already discussed in detail, and we've covered that. It talks then about the enhanced service for the advice and guidance. Again, very little detail in terms of what it actually means.
It talks about the objectives, doesn't it? The enhanced service will incentivise even closer working between general practice and secondary care, and support the government's commitment to move to more care from secondary care to community settings, which is quite an ambition for advice and guidance, and does imply a shift in work in addition to just advice, potentially, or an objective to do that, which I think is interesting to note.
And then finally, the weight management enhanced services continue, which seems to be the flavour of every single contract update letter we've had for the past 3 or 4 years or so. So they seem to include it from there.
Maybe with just showing people what's in the remainder of the annexes. Although we will leave people, I think, to digest that.
So that's the 30 coming on screen right now. It's the 31 criteria that are going to be effectively retired. So therefore, this is what's now going to make up the 212 QOF points that is now being made available through the item of service payments to vaccinations and through SFE payments and the changes to the CHD, which is these ones. So actually,
it does have the comparison.
Yes. So apologies. The reason why we couldn't see that is when we looked at it on my laptop. I don't have the full Word. I have a slightly different version, and it didn't show us the right column.
And it chopped off.
Yeah, it chopped it off. So apologies. It is there. There you go, and it's evident, and it shows you the difference in terms of the point values and the criteria. And you can see that there are some significant changes. The COL 04 in particular is a big change there.
55% upper.
Yeah. HYPE 08 has a reasonable uplift in terms of that upper criteria. HYPE 09 a slight shift, 5% there. STI 014 and 15 have changes, with 14 being quite significant, I think, about 12%.
Also noting the change in the number of allocated QOF points as well, which is just go to the top so people can see, which is the third column for each year as well. So there's actually a significant increase in many of these indicators in terms of those reallocated QOF points. So it may be that at a certain same point of achievement, you will be receiving more money for achieving that. Although, of course, you might have fully achieved the retired QOF points. So in the mix, it may be that you're not getting the same money, to be honest.
And then let's just see where the bigger issues are. Just
go back up.
No, that's fine. Actually, that's fine. I was just going to say, I think the bigger one was that last one. And then these are some of the word changes with it in terms of how you mentioned about the nice changes. We kind of said we weren't going to look at this in detail just because of the fact that
it's here.
It's here, basically. And these tend to change as well, has been our experience before the actual contract comes out. And then this is talking about the vaccination and IMS schedule changes that it mentioned, and we've covered just briefly as well. And I believe
that's the end.
That's it
of that letter.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is go back to some of the comments because we've had loads go through. Oh, good Lord, we've got far too many.
If we can't do them all, it doesn't matter. People can read each other's comments
sort of,
as well.
But
if we have time to do them all.
Yeah. So Jamie's asking, is GP Connect the one we all advised to rush off as part of collective action? Yes. So I suspect they'll be switching it back on when that comes through. We've also had those who suggested this have clearly had to pin a toddler down for a second vaccination when they're still screaming from the first.
Oh, okay, that's the reduction in the age. It's easier to pin down an 18-month-old.
Fair enough. Well, she's saying they've never had to, so actually thinking it's harder now to do that and stuff. But I wonder if shifting
an additional one, maybe it's an
but I wonder if
point.
shifting the age range for MMR, I can understand why shifting the age criteria for MMR, if the evidence shows it still works, is quite powerful, because actually that's the one that people have an association, obviously, for the timing of it with autism and stuff and things, and potentially where that has an impact and things. Shankar mentioning we need improvements to GP Connect update record at pharmacy end, revised choice of snowmakers, brief structured templates in the 4 pharmacy IT systems. I think there's some questions around that, how to work with, and there's an interesting discussion going on in the chat between Shankar, Dustin, and Connor about some of this. So you guys definitely go for that. I think if anyone can fix that situation, it'd be you three, and maybe some help from Redmore and other places. Increasing max R's reimbursement without increasing total allocation will add extra pressure on R's budgets, adversely affecting other roles, as now in one put, and this is before any NI impact. I think that's the concern many people have, and right for raising it, Phil Chapman, in terms of what's going on. I think that's it for the comments at that point. So, this point, and I know we're about an hour and a half in. It's a long episode. I apologise, but we've had loads to cover. We did want to just briefly cover what's missing, didn't we, Andy?
Yes.
So yeah,
and people will have opinions out there as well. What is missing? There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot there, and we're digesting this on the fly.
Well, so I
there's
think
not much for primary care networks, I guess, but that will come in the DES.
So there's a few unanswered questions in terms of what happens with PCN DES in particular, and as Phil mentioned just there, the question of the uplift in terms of total R's budgets, because not only will R's have to cope with the NI uplifts. Because don't forget, whilst practices have got potentially a baseline increase in GMS funding, we haven't seen a commitment for the same thing for PCNs. So where are PCNs going to get that change in NI uplift for? Because they are separate contracts, remember. Additionally, with that, there have been pay increases that many PCNs have had to give in order to maintain and retain staff, which potentially are not factored into that. In addition, if there's no increase in the budget, how do you make this all fly? And this is a real challenge for PCN clinical directors, myself included, as to how you rectify this without going over budget, because then you have to find money from elsewhere, which then means you can do less with what you've got. So definite concerns in terms of there's no detail on that yet. We hope that will come in the contract.
And hopefully we will see a new PCN DES as well, which will answer some of these questions. I think that's probably the biggest, I guess, tension here that's created by the changes in these contracts.
I think the other thing that's missing is clarity on the national insurance and tax changes that are going to happen. So, there is a suggestion that this is being absorbed into the uplift of the GMS contracts, but we know that's going to be different for different people. And obviously the fact that it's not outright mentioned in the letter, I think is a slight misstep from my point of view, and it raises the question: why is that? Is that because they're waiting for other things or not?
Yeah, I mean, I've interpreted that the assumption within the letter is that currently the position is that practices are going to eat that or make good that increase, and actually the increase in the global sum will have to in part go to supporting that unless something changes. That was my interpretation, but some more clarity would be good. I mean, I think perhaps this is looking to next year. Really, it's just sort of perhaps this contract didn't go as far as some people think it could have done in some areas, potentially around health inequalities, health equity, fairer funding models, and potentially improving, upgrading, replacing the Carhill formula, which does increase proportion of funding to practices with populations facing some challenges, but that's generally a high degree of physical disease burden and advancing age, for example, rather than inequalities around
ethnicity, language, deprivation.
Deprivation is a big one, which we know has a big impact on how well patients engage with their treatment, how well people are able to achieve their QOF. There are changes to QOF, but actually those practices that will be able to achieve those higher QOF thresholds at the upper end are probably going to be practices that in areas that have better engaged patients, potentially, not always. So I think there's perhaps some comments or criticisms to be made around how well this addresses health inequalities, which is a big aim for the government and ICBs to address. So that's a big missing thing for me.
And I go further on that in terms of the vaccination and NIMS schedule changes. So one of the things that we haven't seen is any adjustments in terms of the rather punitive aspects that for areas of deprivation where they have significant different challenge in trying to have patients vaccinated. There's no adjustments being made for that. It's been a constant problem. Many of you may remember my rant from a couple of years ago where I was furious about the fact that there's still not been any change on that. I'm still livid, to be honest, because actually
this is the no exemption reporting.
Yeah, so the fact there's no exemption reporting for patients who are out of sync because they've come from abroad. That actually we can't force patients to have vaccinations, and parental responsibility is part of this. And if you can invite a patient in numerous times, try your best, spend hours with them, they're not going to have them. They're not going to give it to their children. And actually, that just is impossible to achieve from that point of view.
There's a time frame thing as well, because often if you catch people up, you've not achieved it within the correct time windows.
Yeah,
and you still don't get the payment, even though you've done the additional work of chasing those patients.
So phasing issues, and particularly the case for patients who come from abroad, which often happens in areas of higher deprivation as well.
Yeah.
So the fact that there's still no recognition of that, I genuinely feel that's something that's missing. It is a misstep from both the GPC and NHS not to address this growing disparity they continue to create by not addressing this problem. I'm off my rant horse and stuff and things, but definitely some comments coming through from others in terms of things about how this has an impact. So Nat Martin, some of you may remember from the live stream a while back, not to mention the same visit version that comes with rurality coming through in terms of that as well. I think that'll.
The comment above is fair as well. I guess not engaging patients don't come and take all your appointments. Like well-to-do 60 to 80-year-olds in some areas, I guess. So it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? So I think
you may also engage in private healthcare and therefore have a different use of the system as well, in particular. I think that there's lots of stuff that's going on that raises questions. I think we will hope. I mean, one of the things missing, I think, is in terms of the QOF changes. So we've had some QOF changes, but actually, many of you remember there was a wholesale consultation on payments to general practice of QOF and other types of things, and we've not seen the outcome of that. Many people thought that would happen for this year, and it hasn't. I suspect the change in government has been a huge part of that, but again, it's stuff that's missing that we were anticipating would happen. So, okay, what's going on there in terms of when will that happen?
Yeah, and I guess the other things, if we're thinking about reflections and what's missing, integrated neighbourhood working. Neighbourhood working was not really mentioned, and obviously we know that it's a big objective of the government to create and shift us towards the neighbourhood health service, the new NHS. So that will be coming, I guess, in the 10-year plan. There may be more about that in updates to the primary care network. So I just thought it was interesting that wasn't there, and that's something that I'd be interested to see.
Well, very much.
future.
And again, is there an extra part of this we haven't yet to see that's going to come? I mean, many of us would hope that this is the limit of the changes because this is what the GPC have agreed to. So I think if extra stuff was being put in, it raises the question of, well, if they're not sharing that with the GPC, are we heading for yet another imposed contract? Which I don't think the government really wants to do this. Though they want to show a different flavour of what they're doing and achieving with general practice. And in order to do that, they have to have a different relationship, which seems like
yeah, Katie Bramwell's statement was said some positive words about the relationship with the government and the negotiations, so we can maybe draw some reassurance from that. I think Katie also said this is actually a really big increase in funding. Similar levels to the primary care network's DES, but in core funding, I think she said something along those lines.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of, I guess, re-challenging this thing. Actually, we've begun to talk about some of the negative aspects and things that aren't there, but actually it's a big headline increase in funding, and there's a lot of positivity there and some positive noises from BMA GPC. So and the government is listening and acting, KBS said. So there's some, there's some.
I think, like we said,
cautious positive.
This is the potential offshoots and the growth opportunities for general practice to change. I think the bigger thing will be the contract next year. I think that's the clear direction we're seeing from this. So, great point to talk about the future. What's going to happen now? So, timelines, I think, are really useful, Andy, to cover this point. So, the contract offer is out. Okay. I think the next key point is going to come.
I guess the details are with the GPC.
Yes,
at the moment.
Potentially, further details are with the GPC and with NHS England. I think the next key point is actually going to be the LMC special conference on the 19th of March, because actually that will be a turning point for many of the LMCs to add into the discussion point. And remember that Katie mentioned that Wes Streeting, by the 19th of March, she wants written confirmation there will be a wholesale renegotiation of the contract for next year. So that, I think, is a key time frame. She has given government, Department of Health, a deadline that needs to happen by that point. And if it doesn't, then I suspect there'll be a question of whether the GPC agrees with the ongoing contract at all at that point, because that's what they've committed to. That's their big ask from all of this, is to do that. That's why they've agreed to the online consultation stuff being in there. That's why they've agreed to GP update record changes that Jamie mentioned earlier, that many practices switched off. That's why they've agreed to the continuity of care stuff and all these other changes. That's why the GPC have agreed to it, on the premises that contract negotiation wholesale for the entire GP contract is up for grabs for next year. So it'll be interesting to see whether that is committed.
It will be interesting, and so be careful what you wish for as well, because there's a lot that could change and swing in either direction. I guess the next sort of new contract comes into force at the beginning of the new financial year, so the 5th of April.
So we anticipate the last week of March there will be the detail of the contract. It happens every year. So that could be really interesting, because that's the end of Ramadan for me. So we may be a little bit later than planned in terms of coming out with some stuff, if that was to be the case. So please,
but watch this space.
Yeah, watch this space. But we apologise if it's a little bit later. Okay, I'm going to have to give you apologies there, because I'm afraid that last week of Ramadan is very, very chaotic and busy for myself. So and things. So that's my excuse right now for everybody. Although
I guess the next date after that. So within the letter, a lot of the new changes. I think the date for all of the new sort of requirements to do things is the 1st of October. So that's sort of a key date within that letter. So I guess that's a key date for your calendar as well. So there'll be some new requirements to be in place and being delivered by the 1st of October. And then after that, I guess as you say, coming round to this time next year, potentially a very different contract.
Yeah, very much so.
PCN DES contract somewhere in there. Do you think when would we expect to know how that's changing?
I suspect it will drop like it did last year at the last point. So it'll be the last week of March that we will have everything come out in terms of what the details will be. So as ever, there's going to be a raft of documents that come out typically in that last week that explain the PCN DES. There'll be clarifications for the GP contract. There'll be clarifications for some of the other stuff that we've talked about in the schedules and things. There may even be an extra part. Who knows?
And of course, we've got other government documents coming out, such as the 10-year NHS plan as well. So there'll be other documents to kind of look at throughout the year. I don't think we know exactly when they're going to drop, but that's expected sometime in the spring, I think.
Yeah,
they said.
and I think recognising that there are still some other contracts yet to come out, which will impact general practice. So there's the pharmacy contract that we talked about earlier that's going to be coming out soon. I suspect the detail of the dental review will have an impact on general practice as well, in terms of what that will look like for healthcare as a whole. And there was one more that I've now unfortunately forgotten.
DDRB uplift figure will be interesting as well, and they've said that there will be an opportunity to make amendments to the contract taking into account of higher pay awards. They've assumed 2.8, haven't they, within this? I guess it's likely to be higher than that in reality for doctors and dentists. So
we've got some more comments coming through. I'm just going to go to those. Just before I do, I would really appreciate it if you haven't done so, if you click the like button. And the reason for doing that is that tells us that this has been really useful, given the fact we've now been going for an hour and 38 minutes. Apologies, it's not been more succinct, but hopefully this is the detail that many of you crave, and we will do a summary in a second. Secondly, it basically does better on YouTube, which is great for us, because then that means that actually it gets to more people and stuff and things. So please hit that like button right now. In terms of other things, so Nat made a really good point that I think is worth sharing with everybody, but the overall summary is this contract will stave off total death of general practice for a year, but if they carry on with the financial envelope, they will never get the aims of the 10-year plan that's coming delivered. I think that says it all, and that's very much what I understood Katie to be saying as well from some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess 7.2% will not achieve the large shifts in the NHS that they're looking for, particularly hospital to community. It's not a transformational contract, and hopefully, if there are big ambitions, we'll have a contract to match that next year.
Steve, £9 per patient funding increase needs putting in context of the £25 to £35 per patient loss over the past 9 years if it kept up with inflation. Very valid point that it is appreciated that there's an uplift. How appreciative should we be, given the fact that actually if we kept up with inflation, actually we would have a significant more funds for patients and actually probably doing a lot better job. I think on one of the radio interviews that Katie's given, she mentioned that the current piece of the pot that the general practice have is about 5% compared to go back to 2007 where it was 11% of the NHS share. That is bonkersly different, and obviously that is why you can't see a GP, and stuff. I've got to stop saying that. Sorry, apologies everyone. Shank, so Connor, I'll take that one off actually, because I think they're having an individual discussion in terms of what's going on. Steve again mentioned needs to make sure patient expectations are managed. This won't be bring back family doctor and the rush as well. GPs in the media don't need to over egg this. True. Jayesh coming out and Hannah coming out with good session. Thank you guys. Really appreciate the comments and stuff. I think other things to be aware of that are going to have an impact on this. So I know one of the bits that everyone's concerned about is this whole online consultation shift and stuff and things. And I think one of the interesting things is how the system providers are going to adjust to this as well, because they will need to. If there is a different way that practices are monitored, then you would want to assume that NHS England will be putting different contracting requirements on the providers to help some of the, because let's be honest, some of the aspects of how we manage online consultation particularly is not great. The fact that some places are still having to add separate appointment slots onto their system, the fact that some systems aren't aligned with the NHS app, which is a clear direction of the government in terms of access for patients and things. So I think we are going to see some changes in terms of that happen. I think if people want to know more, obviously on the separate part of this channel, we cover the providers, and I've got really interesting streams coming up on the 12th of March with Accurix, a couple of others coming up later in the month with other providers and various other aspects in terms of how to utilize healthcare from there for you. So definitely check those out. Other thing that I think is worth mentioning as well, and I know we mentioned it earlier, but we really want you to come and join us. PCN plus 25, where we're going to be discussing a lot of this in so much more detail, not just us, is it, Andy?
No, it's also Ben Gowland of the Primary Care Podcast and Tara Humphreys of the Business of Primary Care. Is that what the podcast is called?
Yeah,
still called that. Yeah, I think she's got some other sub podcasts as well. So really great lineup, and we'll be having speakers from around the country talking about topics like primary care development, organisational development in general, integrated neighbourhood working, modern general practice. It's going to be really, really good. And if people want to join us, we're going to pop some information on the screen. So
yes, there'll be in the links down below. I'll put them up and stuff, but unfortunately, I don't have them keyed up ready for you, I'm afraid. Oh wait, no, Andy's got them. Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
There we go.
This is Tara's website. But you can go to thcprimarycare.co.uk/PCN-plus-live, and you can sign up and join us and have a look. There's a photo there from last year when we were at Nottingham Business School, where we've upgraded to the Crown Plaza Hotel this year. So it'll be a really nice conference, and there are still tickets available to buy online or to sign up for a reserve list ticket, so we can let you know if the vacancy arises. Just
before we sign off, so we've got some more comments coming through, but we've been asked always to try and give a summary, because obviously we've been going for an hour and 43 and we need to get moving soon because you need to go. So we're going to do a really quick summary. Do you want to do this, or am I doing this, or how are we doing this?
Oh gosh, Kenny, there's so much. I'm going to say you can do it.
All right, fine, let's go. So I'm going to try and remember as much as we can in this summary of the contract changes. So the big headline stuff is the increase in funding, 889 million that's going in total in terms of delivering the contract changes. In addition to that is an 80 million pot that's going to be for advice and guidance. Details yet to come. Part of those changes will also incorporate retirement of certain QOF criteria, 31 criteria in total, of which we have shown that to you on the full live stream, of which some of that basically equates to, well, that equates to 212 QOF points. Those 212 QOF points, as part of that, some of it is being used to pay for the item of service increase charge of £2 per vaccination, and the full schedule of that, again, we've shown you in the full episode. Also some SFE changes in terms of payments for locum reimbursements, etc., maternity costs, and then additionally increasing the QOF pointage to cardiovascular prevention QOF criteria. Unfortunately, the downside to that is that achieving those criteria is now harder. Various changes, some of them going up to 90% as a result of that. The next part we talked about was about the change to the additional roles, the PCN DARES, in particular, the two aspects of the is the additional roles reimbursement scheme, which is the amalgamation of the GP and Rs and the formal Rs into one pot, and the addition of practice nurses, but we still don't have the detail what that means, but it does mean nurses that have not worked in that PCN or the practice representing that PCN. Also, the loss of the restrictions of the number of GPs available to be hired, which does raise some questions for many practices and networks in terms of employment liability. And as one of the comments I think Steve made, there's already a legal challenge on some of the PA stuff that's going on currently, so being mindful of that. The second change for the PCN DARES is the changes to the CAIP payments, so the capacity and access improvement payments, of which the total pot is still the same. However, the local payment that we had from 24-25 is now changed. Instead of being paid in 3 different parts, paid in 2 parts. One which is 2/3 of that payment, which is for modern general practice. No details yet as to what the criteria are for that. And the third payment will be for local risk stratification to enable continuity of care for your patients by the PCN. We will see.
Wow, that was, again, doesn't have any notes here as well. That's absolutely incredible memory work. And then just 2 additional things that we also covered. So one was the requirement of practices to open up online consultation tools to request for routine appointments. Again, we're awaiting detail in terms of quite what that will look like. And then there was the requirement to switch on GP Connect to enable the facility for other NHS providers and private providers to have read access in order to provide safe patient care, with consent being required, particularly for those private providers, and also the ability for community pharmacy registered professionals to send consultation summaries back into the patient workflow to be coded within the patient records, and the potential ups and downs of that facility being available. I think that covers the main points.
That's the headline stuff. There's the detail in the full episode that we've just gone through for the past hour and 46. I think, thank you everybody for joining us. We've got some really amazing comments in there that's still coming through, which is crazy. Serena mentioning about patients being able to book more appointments online, requests to see their usual doctor. How do you think they'll be delivering primary care? I think that will be the online changes that we see. I think, speaking to online providers about that, and like I said, covering some of that. Definitely, if you're using Accurix, or if you want to use Accurix, join us for that live stream on the 12th of March, and that'll be coming up at the end of this. And yeah, I think that's everything, isn't it, Andy?
I think so. Thanks everyone for joining us. We have pretty good numbers throughout the whole thing, which is great.
So we're just shy
of
of 300 of you joining us live. I mean, I think that may actually now be the largest live stream we've ever done, and we've not even got to the full contract review. So if this was an hour and 45, God knows how long that's going to be, but we're going to have to do it.
We'll do it. We'll open up the studio again when that special event happens.
In the comments, please let us know what you thought of the studio. We'd love to know your feedback on that, because I suspect the contract review will probably do a similar format. Thank you all. I hope you had a great time. I'll catch you in the next episode as we take command of primary care and learning.